I just want you to know, for my PDA and ODD kids, we do need to approach it differently. It is a different challenge, and their challenging behaviour is proactive strategies are going to be different, and we need to be aware that for some of our children, it's a far more flexible than, say, a child with autism spectrum who's so much more black and white. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into understanding challenging behaviour, ODD, PDA. Don't worry, I'll explain all this later. But for those of you who are regular listeners, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for being part of this amazing community, and those of you who are in our Facebook community and regularly share ideas and support each other. I just really appreciate those of you who are part of this beautiful community where we're all supporting and learning together. But I just wanted to say a special welcome to anyone who is listening for the first time. As this podcast is about challenging behaviour, ODD, PDA, and I thought there may be people who just stumbled across the podcast because they're living, working, or supporting complex children and students with challenging behaviour. And so a welcome to all of you. I am starting this podcast by sending you my love and a big hug. As the hardest part of challenging behaviour is actually not to take things personally. And having worked with a lot of kids with complex and challenging behaviour, I've learned over the years that a lot of it is about me taking a deep breath, about me not taking things personally. So please do not be hard on yourself. If you've had a bad day, or if you listen to this podcast and you're going, I know I should do that, but I'm not consistent, please don't be hard on yourself. These kids, if you just come from love, and that's why I'm sending you my love, because as long as you come from love and just notice, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do better, but please do not be too hard on yourself. Sometimes it is really hard not to take things personally. Sometimes it's hard not to have a struggle, or sometimes you don't even realize that you were being inconsistent till later. And do you know what? I personally find it especially hard when children are hurting other kids or putting themselves in danger. Swearing, I'm really good at ignoring after working with a lot of kids. Hurting themselves, I find hard. I just want to say that sometimes working with challenging behaviour, if children are hurting themselves or others, it can be hard not to get emotional. It can be hard not to react. So the biggest thing when working with challenging behaviour is always start each day afresh for the child and for yourself. Don't sort of bring yesterday to today. Some of the first children I worked with who were called oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD, or some of the children I've worked with significant trauma, one of the hard parts is that often you have a really good day and you think, yay, we had a great day. Let's do that tomorrow. And the next day is a whole new day. So it goes both ways. Even if you have a bad day, the next day is a new day. And sometimes when you have a good day, the next day is nothing like that good day. And it can be exhausting. So I guess I want to start this podcast with, it isn't easy. In fact, it's okay to not know what to do, or feel like you're tired, or there are days that you think you could have responded differently. That is all fine. I think this is why it is important we have each other and have a community to connect. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning and meeting children who teach me different things about myself and about how to respond and work better and make a difference to them. So this is why I'm sending you a big hug and lots of love, because this podcast could be hard to listen to, and I'm asking you not to be hard on yourself and not go down that rabbit hole of, oh, I know I should do that, or it's okay. It's okay. The fact you're listening to this tells me that you are proactive, that you want to make a difference. So just so you know, we're going to go through some diagnostic terms, then we're going to go through some strategies. Obviously, I could talk for 5 hours on this topic. It's one of my favorite things to do when I go into schools, is to support the most challenging students, but also staff working with challenging students. Oh, and I don't like calling them challenging students, and I don't really like calling it challenging behaviour. I just think our kids who need more support and care and love, kids who need more emotional regulation. I mean, I'm moving away, and lots of you have listened to my podcast before know I'm moving away from seeing it as behaviour. I see it as anxiety or needing emotional regulation or needing more breaks. I'm a big fan of 50-50 behaviour plans. which is 50% what I need to put in place and 50% what the student needs to put in place or the child at home. So up to you, but I highly recommend you really think about all the different things and the different kids. But yeah, anyway, let's dive in deep. PDA stands for pathological demand avoidance. Now, normally you have to have autism to get PDA. There is a lot of controversy over PDA and ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. Are they the same? Are they different? I'm not a psychologist. I don't diagnose kids, but what I know is a lot of the same strategies work. A lot of my kids with trauma, some of these strategies work. But what I know is this: if you are finding that the regular strategies that you're using aren't working for this group of kids, then this is the group of kids I'm talking about. Challenging behavior for me is challenging me to try and find new ways, challenging me to work differently with this group of students. So it's more about challenging myself to work out what works and what doesn't work. Now, the hardest part about PDA and ODD is that so often that each child is so different. What works for one doesn't work for another. And this is why we need a lot of strategies, or a toolkit, as Tony Attwood calls it. And some of my children aren't diagnosed, but I like what Tony Attwood says. Without a diagnosis, children are judged. With a diagnosis, they can be supported. So you might be working with kids who don't have a diagnosis, but you're getting challenging behavior, or you're waiting for a diagnosis. So I do recommend that you get Facebook. There's some great PDA Facebook support groups with lots of information about what PDA is. There's one group called Panda on Facebook. I'll link to some of them. And ODD, connect with other teachers or parents or carers, because I recommend that's like getting a little bit of information ongoing. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview and what I found works for me. So whether it's PDA or ODD, what I know is this: conventional approaches based on firm boundaries, routine, structure, and the use of rewards, consequences, and praise often don't work. Yes, all these things that we were taught that should work, and I talk about working for kids, often don't work for this group of kids. Yes, rewards. A lot of them don't like a reward. I've got kids who don't like to be praised. I've got kids who will have a meltdown if we try and put in place too much structure. So this makes it really hard, and that is why it's exhausting and why sometimes we need to look at things differently. So what I know is this, and actually for this group of kids, it's all about keeping anxiety to a minimum and letting them have a sense of control. So instead of having a work box with start and finish or now, next, later, I'll let them choose what they're going to do now, next, later. I'll let them choose what they're going to do first, second, third, fourth. One of my ODD boys, I would let him actually the night before choose what he was going to do when he came in the morning. And those of you who have done my online virtual course know I talk a lot about that. Transition starts the night before. And for my ODD kids and PDA kids, often letting them choose the night before, and then we would make a little video on our phone. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to come in and do this, this, and this. Now, if he came in and changed his mind, I didn't push back. That's okay. That was his anxiety. As long as we got it done, I didn't care what order he did things in. I really didn't, okay? So the other thing is this, that we all know we've got to build a relationship and trust and rapport, but it can be really hard because some of these kids' interests are video games that are violent, weapons, tools. One of my boys, actually, he was always talking about how he was going to kill me. He was into death and dying, and every time you'd ask him to draw a picture, he'd draw a picture of death and dying. It is hard not to react. And a lot of people get worked up about, oh my goodness, they're drawing those pictures. Well, a lot of the time I just had to ignore it because he was doing what I asked. He was drawing a picture, even though the 3 little pigs might have had blood on them. Sometimes that is hard to say. And that is why I probably would turn off this podcast now if you haven't worked with kids who are ODD, PDA, or have challenging behaviour. Because for me, one of the challenges I've had as a teacher over the years is getting people to understand that we need to accept this is part of their ODD. We can't react to all of that. We have to really choose our battles and not get caught up. Did he draw the picture? Yes. Does it matter the 3 little pigs had a little bit of blood? No. Because if you react, that isn't going to stop him doing that. Well, that's my experience. Anyway, let my high horse run away. But it's really a matter of being very careful with the language you use, balancing the demands, and some days they can handle more demands than others, just like all of us, but being aware of that. So anxiety management is the key. And you all know I love that book, From Anxiety to Meltdown. And I highly recommend, if you haven't got that book, put it on your must-have list. Easy read, covers sensory meltdowns, behavior meltdowns, and tantrums. It's just the best book, and I reread it every year, and it is so helpful for understanding what can be the triggers and what to do. Then the other thing with this group of kids, you need to get good at negotiating and collaboration. So it's not that black and white schedule. You need to let them feel in control. You need to let them be your classroom helper. They love doing jobs, but not the same job every day. You have to mix it up a bit. They love being in groups. I always made them the leader. Don't put them in groups where they can't be in control. Let them be the one who helps the kindies. I had a boy who used to go down and help my kindies, but actually when he was helping with reading, he was learning to read because he was at a kindy level. Be creative. One of my other boys, I used to get him to mark everyone's spelling words because he needed to know how to spell the words to be able to mark them. You've just got to be creative with this group of kids. He didn't want to do spelling lists, but if I said, well, can you be on marking the work? And it was great. He was doing maths too. He was counting 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. And can I say, the other kids are incredibly supportive with this group of kids, and we underestimate how supportive they are. I think that's really important. So I guess what I'm saying, and I really like this strategy, it's disguise demands. You have to be really careful with demands. You have to be quite careful how you disguise them. Just do it indirectly, and even praised. Indirectly praise them, not directly. Like, it's much more subtle. Like, I will say to my teacher aide, oh, now Amanda, come and see this. Isn't this wonderful work? This is fabulous. I love this. But I won't say it directly to Elijah. So I'm much more subtle in the way I do things. And humor. You have to have a sense of humor. Otherwise, you'll be crying most days. I'll be honest. I have seen teachers who just can't laugh at the situation, and parents, and I understand it's not always funny, especially if they're hurting themselves or others. But sometimes the 3 little pigs with a little bit of blood and the putting a different ending to a story or whatever, choose your battles and have a bit of fun and humor. So the biggest thing, and I've already said it, but the biggest thing with this group of kids is pick your battles and be realistic on yourself. If you've got 30 kids in your class, are you really going to pick a battle with this kid? Because you've got other children that need you. Parents, you've got other children or a job. You've got other demands beyond this child. So you have to be realistic and pick your battles. So minimize the rules. Then you're not going to have so many battles. And let them have some control, because when they have control, they are so much more engaged. Yes? Don't get too caught on explaining reasons. If it's sometimes just ignore the situation and they'll work it out. But if they want an explanation, just keep it short, yes? And accept that sometimes things need to be done differently. Sometimes this child learns and engages differently, and be creative in doing that. So, as you can hear, a lot of what I'm saying is we need to adjust our mindset. And that can be hard, because so much of the stuff that you see is not what you would genuinely think. So I guess the big thing to remember is that although this child may look calm, underneath they're probably super anxious. They're probably having a lot of sensory challenges, social. There's so many things that come together that to create the anxiety for this child. And often you don't see that outburst coming, that swearing, that anger, that frustration. What we need to do is be really vigilant at spotting those signs. And those of you who've done my course either online or live virtual know I talk a lot about noticing the signs of anxiety, which might be a change of posture. But for many of my ODD kids, it's a change in the tone in their voice. It's getting louder or stopping talking. It's the way, like some of my children will take on an accent. Some of my children will start talking about a specific topic. That is a warning. So you need to get really good at noticing that and adapting. make sure you listen to my podcast on de-escalation strategies, and there's a great PDF that goes with that, because that would be helpful too to remember. And remember, anxiety can be expressed in different ways. Some of my kids get angry, shout, cry, laugh. Laugh's a really big one. I taught a little girl who would start giggling like uncontrollably. And that was actually very similar to another child swearing at me, yes? Tics, talking excessively. Oh, and the big one. This is boring. I hate this. We've done this before. That is a common one with my ODD and PDA kids. Declaring something is boring. And masking. For many of my girls, that masking, that smiling, and then boom, we get the big crying meltdown or the shutdown. Yes? And for some of my kids, it will be the lashing out. So what we know is this, though, that for many of my ODD and PDA kids, these behaviours arise because they can't cope. We've exceeded their expectations, like they're overwhelmed, and we need to get better at noticing what built up to that overwhelm. You know, that they often didn't show any signs. And for many of my kids, it's like a panic attack, and then really they'll have that big outburst, and then sometimes they'll act like nothing happened, or sometimes they'll take quite a long time to recover from that. So this is why we need to keep calm, reduce stimuli, give them space, be aware of hazard. If I know a child's at the second stage of a meltdown with PDA or ODD, I'm not going to distract them with a cutting activity. Those scissors are going to end up being a weapon. I'm not going to give a child anything on their desk or in their hands that could end up being a weapon. I have to be really careful what I give the child, because for many of my kids, if they go boom, those scissors are going to be thrown. That heavy thing's going to be thrown. Even a heavy tote box. So I don't use tote boxes, they're start and finish. I use the lid off a photocopy box because it's not so heavy. When I work with ODD and PDA kids, I am thinking all the time, what would happen if they end up getting violent? How will they use that? And that's why I'm saying this podcast isn't for everyone, because if you've not experienced this, it's really hard to understand. I guess the other thing that I've sort of touched on is this, but I find this really hard, that so many of us are used to giving praise and rewards, but some of these kids, if you offer them, when you do this, you'll get this reward, that actually stresses them out. It actually creates an additional demand because, oh my goodness, I need to get this done. And if I don't get it done, I'm not going to get Minecraft on my iPad or Fortnite. In fact, it adds another layer of anxiety because they want the reward. So sometimes actually the activity itself needs to be the reward, which sounds weird, but it's just finishing something, not making a big la, you're going to get this. It's just like, now we're doing this. It's keeping this calmness. It's like, we're going to do this and making activity fun. So one of my boys loves Star Wars, and we do a word find, and then he could color in the lightsabers. That was enough for him. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to do this special Star Wars activity, or you can play with your Star Wars Lego, you know? So just be careful that the rewards don't become too bigger demand. Like, I've got to get this done to get that. That is demanding for some of these kids. As I say, some of my kids do not like praise. And again, praise may feel like, oh no, now I have to do that again. And what if I can't do it again? And this is the thing, what I know about these kids, they put so much pressure on themselves. And often then they feel this, oh, but I can't do better than that. And they're going to expect better. So there's sometimes where it's other kids love praise, but this kid mightn't like praise. Now, if they do, lucky you. But I'm just pointing out some things to be aware of. So that using indirect praise, using spontaneous rewards or tangible rewards that are sort of at the end of something, using sort of natural rewards like going out to play, but not saying if you don't do your work, you won't go out to play, and not rushing them. Time is another demand. Now, you all know I'm a huge fan of time timers, but not for this kid. Unless they're controlling it, let them put the timer on, yes? So I'll say to a student, well, how long do you think that'll take? 15 minutes? Oh, it's always a good idea to add a little bit more. Why don't we make it 25 minutes, you know? And if we finish early, that'll be nice. But if it makes them too anxious, don't use it, okay? This is the hard part. Now, as I say, allow plenty of time. Don't pressure them. talk about do a lot of it's okay we didn't finish. Lots of people didn't finish. And I find pointing out other children are bored, other children don't like this, other children didn't finish. Trying to get them realize they're not the only one, because they do tend to catastrophize, which makes it really hard, really, really hard. Okay, I know I've talked a lot, and I know some of you are probably like, oh my goodness, Sue. But I just want you to know, for my PDA and ODD kids, we do need to approach it differently. It is a different challenge, and their challenging behaviour is proactive strategies are going to be different, and we need to be aware that for some of our children, it's a far more flexible than, say, a child with autism spectrum who's so much more black and white. So there's a couple of great books I want to point you to. One is called, I love that series, Can I Tell You About Autism? Can I Tell You About ADHD? Well, there's a new one, Can I Tell You About Pathological Demand Avoidance? And I think this is a brilliant book to have in every staff room, because so often I need everyone on staff to understand. Parents, you should be sharing this with family and friends. It really is so important people understand what PDA is, and the child too. But I think it's just a fabulous book with so many tips and strategies. And it, as all these books always do, that's a girl called Izzy talking about, she's a girl with her PDA and autism spectrum. And she explains how simple everyday demands can cause her great anxiety and stress. So I think this book's great. It's recommended for age 7 and upwards, but I think everyone should read it. There will be a lot of people who read it who are like, oh, I know a kid like this. I know a kid like this. If you follow me on Facebook, I've made a nice visual to sort of explain the things in the book that it says can help you. So, for example, page 16, Izzy talks about how helping her with social skills is really important. Yes? And talking about how she likes having friends and how important friends are, and how we can actually help her work with other children. So teaching social skills is really important. Building rapport, as I said, is on page 34. Avoid power struggles is on page 28. Identifying triggers in advance on page 26. Using their special interest, no matter how bizarre, okay? Doesn't matter what it is, you can use it. One of my boys love weapons, and we use weapons to actually learn for geography different countries of the world, because different countries have different weapons. So where would we find a samurai sword? Where would we find a bow and arrow? This was a great way. We could use weapons in a positive way, and then we used it for learning what they're made out of. So then we could do metal, wood, all of these things. So interesting. Now, it does have in here develop routines, but as they say, it's things like this. I like this one. Some things that help. Mum sets out my clothes and packs my school bag the night before, so I only have to choose my snack before break time. I can choose to have my breakfast in the kitchen or in front of TV or in my bedroom. So they're having a routine having breakfast, but they've got some choices in it. And that's what I used to do. So one of my students, he could choose to work at the table or under the table. He could choose to work on the mat or in the corridor. He could choose to work in my classroom or in the principal's classroom. And they were choices. And I had a really supportive principal, so that made a big difference. So that is a brilliant book just to help everyone understand pathological demand avoidance. There isn't one on ODD, but I think this is helpful to understand both. But there will be people who argue with me they're not the same. I understand they're not the same, but I find similar understanding and strategies work. Now, last year on Facebook, or maybe it was the year before, I asked in my parent carer community, which is a private group, what book, and if you have kids with ODD, I've got lots of parents looking for a book. What book do you recommend? And 80% of the parents recommended a book called The Defiant Child, A Parent's Guide to Oppositional Defiant Disorder by Dr. Riley. Now, I got the book and it is fabulous. I see why parents recommended it. And teachers, even though it's for parents, we have to work together. And I think it is fabulous for teachers. Now, it is not an easy read. And what I mean by it's not an easy read, some of the things in here are hard to read. When you read about some of the behaviour students have, when you hear about how they never did it, it wasn't them. So many of the things that I read in here, it's like, oh, wow, I've taught kids like this. Oh, I know a child like this. Sorry, I've made a mistake. I just pulled out the piece of paper with the pages that I was going to read to you. Silly me. Anyway, But what I like about this, it's got a chapter on understanding the defiant child, which I think teachers need to read. It's got the importance of structure, which is very helpful. It's got some great stuff on teenagers. But the one I like, when talk fails. And for so many of my kids, that talking isn't what they need. You know, that so often for my kids, we've got to look beyond the talk, because if you try and talk to them, they will just push back and get angry with you. So if you do have an oppositional defiant disorder child or one in your class, I do recommend that you have a look at this book. It really is a very interesting read, and it really does do a deep dive into understanding ODD. And I can see why so many parents found this book helpful, because it's practical, it's realistic, it describes so many of the children that I have taught in the past and gives you examples and then what to do. But I guess in many ways I found this book reassuring. I was like, oh, yeah, I've taught a kid like that. Oh, I can see why that worked and that didn't work. I can see why saying you can work at the table or under the table is better than telling them they need to sit at their table, which is when I taught children with autism, I'm all about clear, concise instructions and not making it grey. Well, this child actually often needs a little bit more flexibility, needs a little bit more space, needs more control, needs to be able to choose what order they do things in. So it is very different to working with a child with just autism spectrum disorder. However, I still believe that anxiety is what underpins a lot of this. For children with challenging behaviour, we need to address the anxiety. So if you want to know more about how to address anxiety or how to put in place strategies for these kids, I would love you to join me for one of my live virtual courses that are coming up, or the online courses, or if you're working with older kids, Dr. Tony Atwood's course on my website. So have a look on my website. There's lots of courses to make a difference. And if you have done my course, there's a masterclass or a graduate course called Emotional Regulation. And this is a really important course about helping children manage their anxiety, understand their emotions, because so many of my children, they don't even know the anxiety is building. They just feel this feeling and don't know what it is. So we need to help them with that. So I just wanted to say, if you haven't joined me for a course, I would love you to join me for a course. But I also wanted to say that over the last couple of weeks, I don't know what I put out to the universe, but I have had some beautiful emails from people, and I just wanted to share with you some of these beautiful emails and comments from people, because they really warmed my soul, and some of them made me teary because they were just so beautiful. So Karen came to my whole day last term, and I just love this. She said, before your course, her student was disengaged, unwilling to work independently, in small groups, or even in a one-on-one situation. I learnt so much from your course in understanding this young man, year 2, new to our school. I have implemented multiple techniques, such as one more technique for sitting on the floor, and his biggest challenge was writing. What a change we have had. It's the small things that make such a difference. My young man is now excited to beat his time for sitting on the floor, that he races to grab his timer as soon as the kids have to come and sit on the floor. Such a small adjustment to the writing criteria, and now he's writing a whole page of quality writing, whereas before we couldn't even get one sentence. Now, this is me talking now. That's what Karen said. But what I love is Karen saying it's just all those small little things. And I do believe it often is those small little things. But this is a bit that just warmed my heart. She said, the best thing, he said today, I think I like my new school. It's better here. People like me. Isn't that beautiful? So thank you, Karen, for letting me know what a difference the course made, but also for putting in place all those little strategies. I'm sure you had to try a few of them to make a difference, and I'm so thrilled he's trying to beat his time on the mat. How cute is that? I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. And then this one, just love this. So Alicia sent me this. Actually, I just got this the day before yesterday. My son had multiple incident reports per day for physical violence and spent most time out of the classroom. I got called to take him home by 10 most days. The change happened when his SSO was off sick, and the school agreed for me to come in and assist my son. With all I learnt through your podcast and information, I had my son in the classroom engaged with the use of the first and then and behaviour agreement. I credit that to my education from you and not as his mother. That is just so beautiful, Alicia. And I know we've had a few emails back and forth. And what I loved is Alicia really does believe that a lot of people are like, oh, it's because you're his mum. And she's like, no, it's all the things I learned from you, Sue. But she also in one of the emails said that my son, and therefore mine, and his whole family's life and happiness is so much better from what she's learned on the podcast. So thank you, Alicia. That is so wonderful. If you know anyone who could benefit from listening to this podcast or joining my e-newsletter and being part of our community or joining my Facebook page, please let them know. You letting people know is sharing and caring. Sometimes going, hey, I listened to this podcast, I thought of you, makes people feel supported. So I would love you to share this podcast, anyone you know with children with ODD, PDA, challenging behaviour. I hope you've got some little tippets to take away and things to think about. I don't have all the answers, but sometimes I might just make you think, oh, that student, I can see things haven't been working. Maybe we need to go this way. So do have a look on my blog that goes with this because there's more tips and strategies. As always, I treat this like we're sitting down for a cup of tea, but I always try and include more specific and more dot points about this to help you make a difference to you and the kids you know.
I hope you've got some great strategies and tips to make a difference. Next week, I have Laura Kirby, who is an expert on PDA, on the podcast, who is going to share with you some amazing tips and strategies, as well as the best explanation of the difference between ODD and PDA I've ever heard. If you don't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. It's free, and it just means as soon as the podcast is out, you'll know to go and listen to the amazing Laura.